Captain Jorslok was having a rough cycle. The Atraxian fleet's most renowned xenoanthropologist, celebrated across 12 star systems, had never been so thoroughly baffled. His 6 eyes blinked in a synchronized flutter as he stared at the writhing human on the bioslab. "This is impossible," Jorslok muttered, his voice a low hum that vibrated through his thorax. His 4 arms worked simultaneously, operating the scanning instruments around the bioslab. The instruments whirred and beeped, spitting out streams of data that made even less sense the more he analyzed it. "Explain, Captain," said Arweltan, his second-in-command, her mandibles clicking anxiously. She stood at the edge of the lab, her antennae twitching in agitation. What could possibly be so perplexing about one soft-skinned bipedal species? Jorslok turned his head, one set of eyes focusing on her while the others remained glued to the holographic projections. Everything is wrong with this specimen." The human groaned on the slab, its ruddy skin flushed with color. It was a male, barely adult by their species standards, yet its body already showed signs of inexplicable biological trauma. The scars, the broken bones that had healed in jagged lines, the density of its musculature. None of it followed the predictable patterns of evolutionary biology. "This creature has no logical survival design," Jorslok said, gesturing at the human. "Its internal systems are wildly inefficient. It relies on chemical combustion to function for star's sake. Its blood is an iron-based fluid that should oxidize catastrophically under prolonged exposure to atmospheric gases, yet somehow it persists. And," he paused, pointing to a glowing diagnostic readout, "look at this. Its immune system actively damages its own body while fighting infections. What kind of evolutionary path would produce such chaos?" The Atraxians were one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, their understanding of biology so refined that they routinely engineered entire species to suit their needs. Their society valued logic, efficiency, and harmony with the natural order. The human on the bioslab represented none of those things. "Perhaps it is defective," Arweltan offered, though her voice betrayed uncertainty. "Defective?" Jorslok repeated, his mandibles flaring in irritation. "If this specimen is defective, then its entire species must be defective. The genetic scans show these anomalies are consistent across all members of its population." Arweltan approached cautiously, peering at the holographic display. "Its musculature and bone density are unusually high for a species of its gravity range. Perhaps its environment is far more hostile than previously documented?" "That's the strangest part," Jorslok replied, pulling up planetary data on Earth. "Their homeworld is relatively mild. Its gravity is standard, its atmosphere is breathable, and its predators are limited in number and scope. There is no logical reason for a species from such a world to evolve this way. Then why?" "I don't know," Jorslok hissed, his frustration palpable. "But there's more. This creature's pain receptors are completely nonsensical. It experiences extreme distress from minor injuries, yet its body routinely suffers catastrophic trauma and continues functioning. I can't decide if it's fragile or invincible." The human groaned again, louder this time, and one of its eyes flickered open. Jorslok froze. "It's awake." The human, whose name was Jackson Carter, squinted against the harsh white light of the lab. His head throbbed, and his mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. He groaned again, this time more deliberately, and struggled against the restraints holding him to the slab. "Where am I?" he croaked. Arweltan took a step back, her antennae stiffening in alarm. "It speaks." "Of course it speaks," Jorslok snapped. "Their species has rudimentary language capabilities." Jackson's eyes fluttered fully open, and he turned his head, focusing on the 2 alien figures before him. "Whoa, okay. That's new," he muttered, his voice tinged with groggy confusion. Jorslok leaned closer, his mandibles clicking in curiosity. "You are aboard the Atraxian research vessel Corlin. You were retrieved from a derelict ship near the edge of your solar system. Your biology," he hesitated as if the words pained him, "is unlike anything we have encountered." Jackson blinked. Thanks? Thanks?" Arweltan repeated, incredulous. "It considers this an act of gratitude?" "Hey lady," Jackson said, his voice gaining strength, "I don't know what you're saying, but if this is some kind of alien abduction thing, you could have at least started with a meal or something." "I'm starving." Jorslok's mandibles twitched. "It demands nourishment despite its current state? Unbelievable." Jackson struggled again against the restraints. "Yeah, unbelievable is right. Look, not to be rude, but can you let me go? I'm not a fan of hospitals. Or, alien labs." We cannot release you, Jorslok said firmly. Your biology requires further study. You are an enigma, human? Jackson snorted. Buddy, if you think I'm an enigma, you should meet my Uncle Ray. Guy eats nails for breakfast, literally. What's so weird about me? Jorslok's upper eyes twitched toward the diagnostic readouts. Where do I begin? Your body temperature fluctuates wildly, your skeletal structure shows evidence of numerous breaks and fractures, your respiratory system is inadequate, and your immune system seems to prioritize self-destruction over defense. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Yeah, that sounds about right. Welcome to being human. Jorslok leaned back, his thorax vibrating with frustration. You speak as though these flaws are normal. They are, Jackson said, shrugging as best he could within the restraints. I mean, yeah, humans break bones and get sick and sometimes, die in stupid ways. But we're tough. We bounce back. Bounce back? Arwell 10 echoed, her voice dripping with disbelief. Yeah, Jackson said. Like, you can knock us down and we'll just keep getting up. Hell, some of the best stories we've got are about people who should have died but didn't. We're scrappy like that. Jorslok tilted his head, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Your species values resilience? Of course we do, Jackson said, his voice tinged with pride. We might not be the biggest or the strongest or the fastest, but we've got heart. And guts. And, stubbornness mostly. The Atraxian captain turned to Arwell Tan, his lower eyes narrowing. This changes everything. Their biology may be inefficient, but their psychology is uniquely suited to overcoming adversity. They do not merely survive, they adapt. Arwell Tan hesitated, her antennae twitching nervously. Are you suggesting this chaotic design is intentional? I don't know what I'm suggesting, Jorslok admitted. But I need more data. He turned back to Jackson, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. Human, you will assist us in understanding your kind. Your cooperation could determine the fate of future Atraxian-human relations. Jackson grinned. You want to study me? Fine. But you'd better feed me first. And maybe throw in some coffee while you're at it? As the Atraxians prepared to delve deeper into the mysteries of human biology, Jackson couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and amusement. Sure, he was strapped to an alien slab and being treated like a science experiment, but he'd been through worse. After all, he was human. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was surviving the impossible, and confusing the hell out of anyone who tried to figure out how. Jorslok could hardly focus as the human devoured the meal placed before him. For a species allegedly fragile and inefficient, this Jackson Carter ate with the ferocity of a Class 4 apex predator. A tray of assorted nutrient blocks, designed to cater to Atraxian dietary needs, was reduced to crumbs in minutes. Jackson smacked his lips and leaned back, patting his stomach. Man, I don't know what that was, but it hit the spot. Got anything sweet though? Maybe dessert? Arwell Tan stared in abject horror. It consumed Atraxian nutrient blocks. Those are fortified with trace elements of Drasilium. That substance is toxic to every known oxygen-based organism. Asterisk toxic. Asterisk, Jackson said, his grin widening. Lady, you clearly haven't seen what humans eat back home. Drasilium or whatever. We eat stuff that's glowing and still call it a midnight snack. Arwell Tan recoiled, her antennae stiffening like metal rods. Jorslok ignored her, too focused on the strange readings coming from the human's body. His internal system has already neutralized the toxic elements, Jorslok murmured, his mandibles twitching with both fascination and frustration. And he's metabolizing the nutrients faster than any Atraxian could. Jackson raised an eyebrow. So, you're saying I'm built different? Yes, Jorslok replied curtly. But not in a way that makes any logical sense. He spun his lower arms toward the glowing diagnostic displays, expanding the scans to highlight anomalies. Look at this. His liver is producing a compound to counteract the Drasilium, a process that would take Atraxian cells several hours. His cells, meanwhile, are replicating with an energy efficiency so low that it borders on dysfunction. Yet the results suggest a degree of adaptability that defies probability. Jackson shrugged. I mean, that's biology for you. We don't need to make sense, we just need to survive. That's precisely the problem, Jorslok muttered, half to himself. Your biology contradicts everything we understand about survival. Hours passed, and Jackson remained under observation. Jorslok and Arwell Tan worked tirelessly, running test after test, each one raising more questions than it answered. The human's resilience was uncanny, but it wasn't just his physical traits that baffled the Atraxians. It's not just his biology, Jorslok said, his voice tinged with wonder. It's his psychology as well. Observe how he reacts to confinement. Arwell Tan glanced toward the bioslab. Jackson had been freed from the restraints after he complained about feeling too much like a lab rat. Now he was pacing the lab, humming a tune to himself and inspecting the alien equipment with a casual curiosity. He is unconcerned, Arwell Tan noted. Shouldn't he be frightened? By all logic, yes, Jorslok replied. Yet he displays no signs of panic or distress. His species seems to possess an unusual tolerance for situations that would induce existential terror in most sentient beings. Jackson tapped on a console, making it beep loudly. So, what's this thing do? Looks like a giant toaster. That is a molecular analyzer, Jorslok said, exasperated. Please refrain from touching it. Jackson stepped back, holding up his hands. All right. Just trying to pass the time. You guys have Netflix on this ship? Netflix. Arwell Tan repeated, tilting her head. Yeah, it's like movies, shows, entertainment, you know? Helps you chill out when you're stuck somewhere boring. Jorslok's mandibles twitched. You find this situation boring? Not gonna lie, a little, Jackson said. Don't get me wrong, the whole alien abduction thing is cool and all, but sitting around while you poke me with scanners isn't exactly thrilling. At least let me stretch my legs. Arwell Tan stared at him in disbelief. Your kind truly is bizarre. Most sentients would be begging for release, or at the very least cowering in fear. Yeah, well, humans aren't most sentients, Jackson said with a shrug. We've got a saying, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Jorslok blinked all 6 eyes at him. What does citrus fruit have to do with resilience? It's not about the fruit, man. It's about attitude, Jackson said. You deal with what you've got and make the best of it. That's just how we roll. Later that cycle, Jorslok convened a meeting with his research team. The lab was filled with Atraxian scientists, each one an expert in their respective fields. Holographic projections of Jackson's physiology floated in the air, displaying everything from his neural pathways to his gastrointestinal tract. We have gathered extensive data on this human, Jorslok began, addressing the group. And the results are troubling. His species biology is a chaotic mess, riddled with inefficiencies and apparent design flaws. Yet somehow these flaws have not hindered their survival. In fact, they seem to have enhanced it. The other scientists murmured in confusion. One raised a clawed appendage. Captain, are you suggesting that their flaws are an adaptive advantage? I'm suggesting that their very chaos is what makes them resilient, Jorslok replied. Take their immune system, for instance. It overreacts to minor threats, often damaging the body in the process. Yet this hyperreactivity also allows them to fight off infections that would devastate other species. Another scientist chimed in. And their skeletal system. It's brittle compared to most species, but it regenerates rapidly and grows back stronger after breaks. It's as though their bodies are designed to recover from failure rather than avoid it. Yes, Jorslok said, his voice growing more animated. And their psychology is equally baffling. They display an unusual tolerance for stress and trauma, often turning adversity into motivation. This human we have studied, he is not just surviving his circumstances. He is thriving in them. As the meeting continued, Jackson lounged in his quarters, oblivious to the debate his existence was sparking. He leaned back in his chair, idly twirling a strange alien device he'd found. Man, he muttered to himself, if this is what first contact is like, I can't wait to see what the second contact's all about. But even as he joked, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. These aliens weren't just curious, they were desperate. And if they thought human biology was the answer to their problems, Jackson had a sinking feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. Captain Jorslok couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something he was missing. The more he studied Jackson Carter and his chaotic biology, the more questions piled up like the detritus of a collapsed star. The Atraxian scientist had built his career on deciphering the complexities of alien life, but this human was testing the limits of his understanding, and his patience. Captain, Arwell Tan's voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. She stood at the lab's entrance, her antennae quivering. We've received word from the High Council. They're growing impatient. They expect results within 2 cycles. 2 cycles? Jorslok hissed, his thorax vibrating in frustration. How am I supposed to untangle the mystery of an entire species in 2 cycles? The Council doesn't understand. This human is a biological paradox. They do not care for paradoxes, Arwell Tan replied coolly. They care for solutions. If we cannot determine the source of their resilience, We risk losing the funding for this research entirely. Jorslok slammed two of his hands on the console. Then perhaps it's time to take a different approach. Prepare the environment simulator. I want to observe how this human responds to controlled stress scenarios. Arwell Tan hesitated. Captain, is that wise? We don't fully understand his limits. Exactly, Jorslok said. And we won't understand them until we push him to his breaking point. The environment simulator was one of the most advanced tools aboard the Corlin. It could replicate any planetary condition from the acidic storms of Gyner 4 to the crushing gravity of V'. For their first test, Jorslok chose a simple simulation, an arid desert environment, complete with intense heat and limited water supply. Jackson stood in the center of the simulated landscape, squinting against the artificial sunlight. So, what's the deal here? You guys drop me in the middle of a fake desert and expect me to do what exactly? We are observing how your species adapts to extreme conditions. Jorslok's voice echoed through the chamber. Proceed as you normally would in such an environment. Jackson rolled his eyes. All right, fine. But if I don't get a water bottle out of this, I'm gonna be pissed. The first hour passed uneventfully. Jackson wandered through the simulated dunes, muttering to himself about the heat but otherwise showing no signs of distress. His hydration levels are dropping, Arwell Tan noted, watching the readings from the control room. Should we intervene? Not yet, Jorslok said, his eyes glued to the monitors. Let's see how he copes. By the third hour, Jackson had stripped off his outer shirt and fashioned it into a makeshift head wrap to protect himself from the sun. He stumbled upon a patch of simulated cacti and carefully broke one open, drinking the water inside. Resourceful, Jorslok murmured, his mandibles twitching in approval. He appears to be thriving, Arwelton added, her tone tinged with surprise. Even under these conditions he remains calm and inventive. Indeed, Jorslok said, leaning closer to the monitor. But the true test will come when his endurance is fully depleted. The next simulation was far more intense. The environment shifted to a freezing tundra, with howling winds and sub-zero temperatures. Jackson shivered violently as snow began to fall around him. You guys really like messing with me, huh? He said through chattering teeth. What's next, a lava pit? Despite his complaints, Jackson didn't stop moving. He found a patch of rocks and used them to build a crude shelter, stuffing his shirt with snow to create an improvised insulation layer. Unbelievable, Arwell Tan said, her voice filled with awe. His body should be shutting down, yet he continues to function. His core temperature is dangerously low, but he's compensating through sheer ingenuity and willpower. It's more than that, Jorslok said, his tone hushed. It's as if his biology has evolved not to avoid failure, but to embrace it. Every setback he encounters only seems to make him more determined. The simulations continued, each one more grueling than the last. Jackson endured acid rain, heavy gravity, and even simulated predators designed to mimic the apex creatures of Atraxian homeworlds. Each time he adapted. He used the acid rain to clean a simulated wound. He devised a method to distribute his weight under the crushing gravity. He even managed to outsmart the predators by setting traps using nothing but rocks and branches. By the end of the final simulation, Jackson was battered, bruised, and utterly exhausted, but he was still standing. Jorslok stared at the data in stunned silence. It's not just his biology, he said finally. It's his mind. Humans are uniquely equipped to turn adversity into opportunity. Their resilience isn't just physical, it's psychological. Back in the lab, Jackson slumped onto a chair, wiping sweat from his brow. All right, science bugs, I've played your little game. What's next? Jorslok approached him, his 6 eyes filled with a strange mix of respect and curiosity. Human, your kind is unlike any species we have ever encountered. Your biology is chaotic, your systems are inefficient, and your survival strategies are unorthodox. Yet somehow you endure. Jackson grinned tiredly. Yeah, we're kind of awesome like that. So, did I pass your tests or what? You have surpassed them, Jorslok admitted. But there is one final question I must ask. Shoot. Why? Jorslok leaned closer. Why do humans push themselves to such extremes? Why do you continue to fight even when the odds are overwhelmingly against you? Jackson leaned back, his expression thoughtful. You know, I'm not sure I can explain it. It's just what we do. We fall, we get back up. We fail, we try again. It's not about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about never giving up. That's what makes us human. Jorslok stared at him, his mandibles clicking softly. Fascinating. Truly fascinating. Arwell Tan, who had been watching from the corner, stepped forward. Captain, I believe we found our answer. The human species thrives not because of their biology, but because of their indomitable spirit. As the Atraxian scientists processed this revelation, Jackson leaned back in his chair, a smug grin on his face. So, what do you guys think? Pretty cool, huh? Jorslok nodded slowly. Indeed human. You are extraordinary. And deeply troubling. Troubling? Jackson asked, raising an eyebrow. Because, Jorslok said, if even a fraction of your species shares your resilience, then humanity may one day surpass even the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. And I cannot decide if that is a cause for celebration, or fear. Jackson chuckled. Well, if it helps, we're usually pretty friendly. Just don't piss us off. Jorslok's thorax vibrated with a low hum of amusement. Noted. Captain Jorslok sat in his private quarters, 6 eyes fixed on the glowing data streams projected before him. Jackson Carter's physiological and psychological profiles floated in holographic clarity, surrounded by lines of annotated observations. His biology was chaotic. His mind adaptable. His species, terrifyingly unpredictable. The research team had gathered enough data to make their report to the Atraxian High Council. Yet, as Jorslok sifted through the evidence, unease rippled through his thorax. There was one final decision to be made, and it wasn't just about science. It was about the future of the galaxy. The door chime interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called, and Arwell Tan stepped in, her antennae twitching with restrained curiosity. You summoned me, Captain? Yes. Jorslok gestured toward the holograms. We have the data. But now we must decide what to do with it. Arwell Tan tilted her head. Do with it? We report our findings to the High Council as always. Jorslok's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. And what do you suppose the Council will do with this information? They will likely use it to evaluate humanity's potential, Arwell Tan replied. Perhaps initiate diplomatic overtures or consider containment protocols, depending on their assessment of the risk. Risk? Jorslok repeated, his tone heavy. Humanity is more than a risk, Arwell Tan. They are an anomaly, a species that thrives on chaos, that grows stronger through adversity. Their biology should doom them to extinction, yet it empowers them instead. If the Council views them as a threat, do you think they will stop at containment? Arwell Tan hesitated. Are you suggesting eradication? Jorslok turned to face her fully, his lower arms folded in contemplation. The Council has acted preemptively against perceived threats before. If they decide that humanity's resilience poses too great a danger, they may choose to eliminate them before they can rise to power. Arwell Tan's antennae drooped. But that would be genocide. Surely the Council would not? They would, Jorslok interrupted. And we would be complicit, having provided the evidence to justify it. Meanwhile, Jackson sat in the observation chamber, oblivious to the debate raging over his species' fate. He was engrossed in what he had decided to call Alien Solitaire, a game he'd invented using Atraxian data crystals and a lot of guesswork. The door slid open and Jorslok entered, his posture unusually tense. Hey Cap, Jackson said, glancing up. What's the word? You guys finally figure out what makes me tick. We have, Jorslok replied, his tone carefully neutral. And now we must decide what to do with that knowledge. Jackson frowned, setting down the crystals. That sounds ominous. What's going on? Jorslok hesitated, his mandibles clicking softly, a sign of deep internal conflict. Human, do you understand the implications of your existence? Your species' resilience is unlike anything we have ever encountered. You are a paradox, a threat, and a marvel all at once. Thanks, I guess, Jackson said, his tone uncertain. The Atraxian High Council will not see it as a compliment, Jorslok continued. They will see it as a danger. And they may act to eliminate that danger. Jackson's face darkened. You're saying they might come after humanity? Yes, Jorslok admitted. And if I submit my report, it could be the catalyst for such an action. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Jackson stood, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by something colder, sharper. So what are you gonna do? He asked, his voice low. Jorslok regarded him carefully. You are a representative of your species, human. Tell me, why should I risk defying my superiors to protect your kind? Jackson met his gaze, unflinching. Because we're worth it. Yeah, we're messy. Yeah, we've got issues. But we're not just chaos. We're explorers, builders, dreamers. We don't just survive, we create. We fight for each other, for what we believe in. That's what makes us human. And if you give us a chance, you'll see it too. Jorslok considered this. Your kind's resilience could be a force for great good, or unimaginable destruction. How can I trust that you will choose the former? Jackson grinned, a spark of defiance returning to his eyes. You can't. But you didn't bring me here because you thought I'd give you guarantees. You brought me here because you wanted to understand. And now that you do, you've got a choice to make. In the end, the choice was Jorslok's alone. When the Corlin returned to Atraxian space, the High Council demanded answers. But the report Jorslok submitted was incomplete. He detailed humanity's biology, their resilience, their adaptability, but he left out the crucial insights that would mark them as a threat. Are you certain of this course of action, Captain? Arweltan asked as they transmitted the sanitized report. No, Jorslok admitted. But I am certain that humanity deserves the chance to prove themselves, just as we did when we first reached for the stars. Back on Earth, Jackson stood on the tarmac as the Atraxian ship ascended into the atmosphere. He watched until it disappeared, a thoughtful expression on his face. Guess that's that, he muttered. But deep down he knew this wasn't the end. The Atraxians had seen what humans were capable of, and now the galaxy would know. As he turned to leave, Jackson couldn't help but smile. Humanity might be messy, chaotic, and downright weird, but one thing was certain, they were just getting started.